Yes, well, you know, you scratch a check and you find a Celt, because the reason these people look vaguely Irish is because the Celts were here 6,000 years ago, long before they reached the Iberian Peninsula of Spain and migrated into England. This was Celtic country. All these round hills that you see have Celtic forts on them,
Really?
6, 7, 8,000 years old. What I'm asking people about is basically what sort of ideas or what's been most interesting or astonishing about being in Prague at this conference. So there's your assignment.
Being in Prague, the energy of the city and the opening that's happening, and just that you can feel it. People are starting to come, out in the street. I woke up this morning to hearing children's voices playing in a playground downstairs, and it was so much fun. It was like this energy and little kids, and I looked down and they were making these wonderful designs with rocks on the sidewalk, and it's the same kind of thing that I hear when I'm in kids in the United States, but it had this joyfulness and an energy in it. And meeting my friends here again. I am part of an international community of people doing work with sacred substances, and I never get to meet them very often. And so when we meet each other, there's a lot of stimulation and heartfelt, warm connections that we don't make otherwise.
The theme of this conference was actually pretty heavy duty. Do you think it comes off as optimistic, pessimistic, naive, or how would you describe it?
I think that the theme was perfect because it's ambiguous enough to bring all of those together. And I think all of those energies are happening now, and that's why it is optimistic and pessimistic and hopeless and hopeful, and it has all of the energy of all the ambiguity and the tensions involved with all of those various polarities sort of swirling around and creating like an energy. It feels almost like a little bit like an energy vortex that's happening, where energies from opposite poles come around and mix together. And I liked Richard Tarnas's talk on male and female coming together, and it made me feel a little bit like the way when the sperm comes up to the egg, and there's this kind of vibration that happens, and it sort of feels a little bit like that kind of energy where it's fertilization.
Full of potential.
Right.
So where are you going when you leave Czechoslovakia? Are you going back?
Well, we're going to go back home, and I've been re-inspired to work on a lot of projects that we have. We're in the middle of putting together plans for a protocol to use LSD with substance abusers, where we've been given permission by the government, but we still have to go through a review panel that has yet to, we haven't figured out how to put that together yet.
So you'll be doing a human studies work with LSD and alcoholism.
And other substance abuse. People need to have the diagnosis of substance abuse. What that means in that person's life, we'll find out when we work with them, but at least to the rest of the world, that's what their diagnosis is, and it allows us to have them enter the study.
Where will this go on?
Probably in Baltimore, Maryland.
Well, that's wonderful. Do you think it means there's a general loosening of attitude or a recognition?
I think there's more chaos. It's a little bit of, it's more that people don't know how to regard it, and it may be that there's some opening in terms of a few more reasonable people who have a little bit more openness to it. They're still pretty paranoid. They want to be able to trust who's doing the work, and how can they trust people if they're doing psychedelic work? So there's still the same catch-22 involved in it.
Of course.
So,
well, thanks for talking with us.
thank you.
Okay. Hope you have fun in Prague.
Yes, I will. You too.
Yeah, I am. Are you going to get out to the countryside at all?
Well, we're probably going to go out on Thursday and visit some things out in the country.
There's a spa at Carlsbad in
Yeah.
western Bohemia, and Castle Karlstein, an hour south of here, is a famous Rosicrucian castle that was involved in kinds of European occult history.
Sounds like
Yeah,
a good idea.
it's neat. It's different. You should really see Bohemia while you're here.
I wish we had made plans to go back a lot later. You know, we're leaving on Saturdays.
Too bad. Yeah, you should have put a week in there just to
Absolutely.
wander around the countryside. Well, thanks for stopping by.
My audience is over there, and I'm talking to Terence.
Well, you're talking to
You have
Terence.
two
but,
camera position. And
correlation.
then my arches failed.
Yeah. So what are we going to talk about?
Well, I'm going to ask you what has been interesting or unexpected about Prague, or how you feel about this whole scene. Is it more frivolous Euro trash, self-congratulatory prosuestry, or you know,
repeat that?
hard-won veterans of the true revolution gathering together in the
now we're going to
foxholes?
shoot, so let's go. Now we begin.
Could you repeat that?
Yes, I was saying, what do you make of the conference? Do you see it as born-again Euro trash posuestry, or hard-won veterans of the true revolution gathering in the foxholes of Eastern Europe to plot our next assault on the barricades?
I see it as a kind of combination.
Quite.
It's a kind of melange. You know? It's kind of a mixture of all of these things. I've actually been having, the hardest time I've been having is trying to figure out if I'm in Disneyland or Paris or Moscow.
You mean because Prague is sort of like a interference pattern formed of all three?
Yes.
It's gnomish Bohemian quaintness overlaid. It's dark Central European angst.
Yeah, and I sort of have, don't you have this feeling it's sort of like a front? And that if you go, it's so incredibly beautiful, and then if you go about 3 miles outside of the boundary, it's going to like be overalls. I mean, you don't see any overalls in town. You see a few of the workmen on the scaffolding.
Have you been into the countryside?
Only on the train.
No, well, I'll tell you, to my mind, what the metaphor for Czechoslovakia is it's Oz. It's the green country with the emerald capital city, with the great palace and the little wizard inside, and all the happy munchkins of Bohemia farming and making cheese and carrying
Yes.
on with their butter and eggs and so on.
But
And,
are they happy out there?
well, they're splitting the country apart, but more power to them, I say.
You think so?
Sure, the people who most want to leave are the poorer, more uneducated, unindustrialized half of the country.
Right.
So if they want to get rid of all this highly developed pseudo-Western European land on the western end of things, probably it's a good thing.
I heard this wonderful story. Do you know this story? That I don't know when this was, but many years ago, the language had completely disappeared. And one man took it upon himself to resuscitate the language. So he went kind of crawling out into the backwoods and found these tiny little villages where just a few of the old people remembered Czechoslovakian language. And he wrote it down and cataloged it and taught it to people, and they taught it to people, and people started teaching it to the children again. And the entire language was resuscitated from this one man's kind of pilgrimage to the sort of residuals of where the language had been stored.
That's interesting.
Isn't that a great story?
Yeah.
And it's a story because it feels it has the potential to be metaphorical for our time. You know, when we're just right on the brink of that loss, you know?
Well, and bringing back a lost language means presumably you bring back the possibility of thoughts that could not be said any other way.
That's right.
So it's like reality itself You are saving it. You're
yes,
bringing it back.
Yes, or things like the gene pool of plants, or
Right,
the,
right.
it feels so metaphorical to me, and it was a successful story. And here we are, and everyone's speaking Czech.
Yes, well, you scratch a Czech and you find a Celt, because the reason these people look vaguely Irish is because the Celts were here 6,000 years ago, long before they reached the Iberian Peninsula of Spain and migrated into England. This was Celtic country. All these round hills that you
Yeah.
see have Celtic forts on them,
Really?
6, 7, 8,000 years old. So it's kind of interesting.
From the 12th century, 13th century, 12th century?
No, thousands of years.
Thousands. Oh,
Yeah,
6,000
years old. No, we're talking deep prehistory here. Old Maria Gimbutas.
Yeah.
Bailiwick.
Yeah.
Well, so where are you going after Prague?
I'm maybe going to Berlin,
Uh-huh.
maybe to Karlsbad. I don't know yet. I'm open. I think the conference is interesting. Were you asking about that?
Yeah, what's the most interesting thing you've run across?
Well, I don't know if there's the most interesting thing, but I think I wonder about the question about that no one seems to be asking about whether or not, when transpersonal psychology first hit, we all had the very optimistic feeling that this was going to make a big dent in the movement of history, just like we all did during the 60s revolution, that this was somehow going to blossom into some major transformation of essentially how people treated each other. And it feels like now these conferences have been going on for, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years?
At least that long.
And maybe it's time to ask that question again.
I mean, what makes us so special? If transpersonal psychology is so wonderful, what has it done for us?
Right. And is it working? And does it have the potential to work? And what does it mean for it to work? And in a way, I feel like people are going up and sort of within their own ideological frameworks, presenting the things that we've heard them present
Again and again.
again and again and again. And it might be time to, I miss a kind of critical evaluation, or everyone's very polite, and saying, well, as Brother David said, and well, as...
You mean no one would dare stand up and say, my God, you're not going to sing a song at the end, are you?
Right.
Or not more of your damn heart.
Right.
Well, Nina,
why are you reading?
That's your wonderful
Why are you
function.
reading from a paper? Why? There's 1,700 people standing there, and you're reading from a paper.
Have you been to lectures? Because I've been making
Yes,
this
I've been
picture,
to lectures, and people read papers.
Well,
Is
yes.
So what brings to my mind is, it's the medium is the message, that if you're going to create a paradigm shift, right, that's about remembering that all of the things that people have been saying, that we're this component and that component, we're spirit and we're nature and we're earth and we're body and we're head and we're mind and we're heart, and then you have to approach the whole thing holistically. You can't do it like this.
So you think gentlemen in tweed suits with small patterns standing before lecterns with their flies open are not leading us into the new world?
Well, I'm questioning it. I can't say for sure, but I'm saying these are the questions that feel like they're moot in the conference, and they're underground. And we used to be the underground, and we used to be the people asking those moot questions and speaking them. And are we still doing that? Are we, or have we become yuppified enough to not be willing to ask those questions?
Maybe it's because I'm obsessed with one subject, but it seems to me...
You are obsessed with one subject, aren't you?
But here's the insight which that gives me,
Yes.
which is, as a movement, this transpersonal thing is vitiated by a huge number of people wanting to cash in on the imagined phenomenon of addiction.
Yes.
So we've got 12-step up the kazoo, And I think, the transpersonal psychology should not be in the business of selling people on the idea of addiction, because it is the end of moral responsibility. If you're an addict, then it's just like getting the flu or PMS or something. It's just not your fault, and you just really better get some psychotherapy and take care of that. So I think I'm surprised that in all these psychedelic panels and so forth, there hasn't been a real attempt to say, look, we need pharmacological intervention. I mean, we're hardwired for bashing out the brains of woolly mammoths.
That's what would put it, I don't know that I entirely agree with you, but that's what would give it a dynamic edge that I don't feel like the conference has yet.
People are too nice.
They're too nice, and they're too timid. And you can't be an underground and be timid.
That's right. The
You have to
avant-garde
be-
didn't get there by
Right.
being polite.
Right. So what happens when transpersonalism becomes somewhat mainstream, not that it is entirely, becomes problematic. Just as what happened in the 60s, it gets kind of bought off, and then people are selling their books and their careers are established, and they're afraid to make those kinds of challenges. I think it'd be great to have a psychedelic panel, or mixed with a 12-step panel.
Were you in the psychedelic panel?
No.
Because it was incredibly polite. I even found myself being polite and thinking things that I thought were bullshit and just letting it fly by because I thought, these
So
people have
what
all
did you
these-
think was bullshit?
Somebody says, they were saying, how can we make psychedelics more respectable? And somebody suggested that they publish a journal in which you didn't sign your articles and you didn't give the names of the patients. So, and I thought to myself, political gutlessness reaches mega proportions. That's not how you do it. You do it by standing up and being counted, not refusing to put your name on your research. I mean, that you've already knuckled under at that point.
See, I think that I still have that sort of Socratic model in my mind. I think that wisdom comes through some kind of dialectical dialogue, and that if you really go for the disparate points of view, then you can form your own synthesis that somehow embodies the truth in some way. That may not be exactly the same, but I've sort of heard the truth of people's orientation.
So it's like the I Ching says, knowledge that is not, I don't know how it puts it exactly, but basically knowledge that is not created out of interaction with critics is sterile.
Right, because there's no feedback loop.
Right.
Which there is in every living system. There's
Right.
some kind of a
Nothing
feedback
to
loop.
polish
Right.
the edges.
Right. And one of the things I've experienced here, I don't know that I want to go on camera saying this, is that the workshop that I felt, or the lecture, whatever, that was the most interesting was somebody I'd never heard of. It wasn't one of the stars
One
of
of
the
the
transpersonal
stars,
world, whose stuff I enjoyed. But it was this woman, she talked about this intergenerational psychological patternings that go on. And for me, it was very contemporaneous with experiences that I'm having. So to hear somebody articulate them, even though it wasn't new information, it was confirming experiences that I was currently having. And so I found it very moving to me. She didn't read a paper, she just talked. And she's not a big star, and she didn't tell stories that I'd ever heard before. And I thought, well, maybe that's something going on here that I'm not so aware of, that there's sort of some of the lesser known people who have had to hone their skills more because they can't rely on their reputations, and they're not in the clique.
Right.
Maybe they're the ones who are really cultivating some of this more avant-garde sensibility.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Once you're a known quantity in the media, you're almost self-defined out of relevance. This is called the dancing bear phenomenon. I hate it. I'm sure you're aware of it as a performer. It's why Ad Reinhardt had to paint black canvases till the day they planted him, and because, you become defined. Class. Well, can we stop now? We've been on camera 2 hours and 20 minutes.